close your eyes for a second. Seriously, just for a moment, block out the room you're in. I want you to erase everything you think you know about the Caribbean.
Everything.
Forget the cruise ships docked in Ocho Rios with their, massive diesel engines. Forget the all-inclusive resorts with the swim-up bars and the wristbands.
The whole tourist image.
Exactly. And forget the maps with English names like Kingston or Spanish names like Port Antonio. Just wipe the slate clean.
It's a hard thing to do because those images are so ingrained in how we sell the island to the world.
They are. But I want you to imagine the smell. It's specific. It's the smell of salt spray mixing with the scent of burning wood and damp, dense, untouched rainforest. I want you to hear the sound of a conch shell blowing in the distance, a low, mournful, resonant sound that carries for miles over the canopy.
Yeah.
We are not in the present day. We aren't even in the 15th century yet. We are standing on the shore of a thriving, complex, sovereign nation.
And that's the key word, isn't it? Sovereign.
Right. But here's the catch. It's a nation that your history books likely told you was just a waiting room for Christopher Columbus.
Or a footnote, a prologue to the real story.
A prologue, exactly. We're doing something a little different today, something very special. We're kicking off a new series. It's a project that I think is going to demand a lot from us and hopefully give a lot back to you. We are looking at a stack of research, articles, historical analysis, and it all frames itself under this one very specific, very evocative banner.
The ABENG signal.
The ABENG signal.
And that name alone, it sends a shiver down your spine if you know the history.
But today, on this show, we are flipping the script. We are taking a deep dive into Xaymaca, not Jamaica, Xaymaca.
Xaymaca.
The land of wood, water, and ancestors. And this isn't just a history lesson. This is episode 1 of something much bigger. We are calling this the ABENG signal.
That name is incredibly intentional. The ABENG, the conch shell trumpet, was used by the Maroons much, much later to signal gathering, to signal war, to communicate across the hills.
Sure. Yeah.
But the technology of the shell, the sound itself, goes back thousands of years before the Maroons. It connects the timeline. It's a through line.
So consider this episode the first blast of the ABENG. We are signaling a new way to look at the timeline because, frankly, the timeline we were taught in school is broken.
It is. It's fundamentally flawed. The standard narrative is the discovery myth. It assumes that the lights only turned on in the Caribbean in 1494 when Columbus spotted the Blue Mountains. Right.
It treats the island as if it were a stage set, dark and empty, just waiting for the European actors to arrive and for the play to begin.
Like the people living there were just extras in someone else's movie.
Exactly. And that is a fallacy that erases thousands of years of human experience, of genius and tragedy.
So what's our mission here?
The source material for this deep dive talks about a 468-year resistance mission. If we start the clock at 1494, we are implicitly agreeing that the history of this land belongs to the invader.
We're centering them.
We are centering the narrative on the person who came to destroy it. So today, we are refusing that narrative. We are strictly looking at the timeline before the boot hits the sand.
Right.
We are going to walk into the villages, the spirit worlds, and the daily lives of the Taino and the people who came even before them, the Redware people. We're going to look at Xaymaca as a fully formed, complex, ancient homeland.
I love that phrase from the research notes. A fully formed ancient homeland. It changes the perspective immediately, doesn't it? We aren't looking at the island from a ship approaching the shore.
No.
We are standing on the shore, firmly planted, looking out at the sea. So let's unpack this. If we aren't starting with Columbus, where do we start? Because the sources mention something really mysterious called the Redware Silence.
This is where it gets fascinating. And honestly, it's a bit of an archaeological detective story. Before the Taino culture that most people have heard of, the people Columbus eventually encountered, there was an earlier migration.
Okay.
We are talking about the Oceanoid people, often identified by archaeologists as the Redware culture because of their distinct pottery. And we are going back to around 600 AD.
600 AD. Let's just pause on that for a second. That is nearly 900 years before any European set foot there.
A long time.
That is almost a millennium of history that usually gets glossed over in a single sentence in a textbook.
Very.
Who are they?
They were explorers. Unbelievably skilled navigators, you have to imagine. They migrated from the Orinoco region in South America, so modern-day Venezuela and the Guianas, moving up through the Lesser Antilles, island by island, until they made the leap to Xaymaca.
And this wasn't an accidental drift.
No, absolutely not. This wasn't a fisherman falling asleep in a boat and waking up in Jamaica. This was targeted, intentional migration using canoes across open ocean.
I think we often underestimate the technology involved in that. Crossing the Caribbean Sea in a canoe isn't like paddling across a calm lake at summer camp.
Not at all.
These are treacherous waters. The currents between the islands, the Jamaica Channel, the Windward Passage, these can be deadly.
Absolutely. It requires a profound knowledge of the stars, specifically the Pleiades, which they use to mark seasons and directions. It requires reading the currents, understanding the migration of birds.
Right, you see a frigate bird, you know land is near.
Exactly. But let's talk about the vessels. These canoes, and that is a Taino word, by the way, that we still use, were massive. Some were carved from a single silk cotton tree and could hold 50, 80, even 100 people.
100 people.
100 people, plus provisions, fresh water, and fire.
That's not a boat, that's an ark. That's a troop transport.
It is. It's a vehicle of colonization, in their own terms. When they arrived in Xaymaca around 600 or 650 AD, they brought their pottery style with them, this redware.
Okay, what makes it redware?
It's smooth, thin, often painted with a red slip, and it's frequently shaped like animals, turtles, bats, frogs. It shows they were immediately observing and revering the local wildlife.
So they're already making this new place their own through art.
Right. But then comes the silence.
The redware silence.
Yes. You find their presence in the deep layers of the ground, the pottery shards, the specific stone tools. But as you move up in the timeline, the record changes. The pottery style shifts. The settlements move from the coast to the inland valleys. The redware people seem to vanish from the archaeological record as a distinct entity.
So what happened? Was it a war? Did the Taino come later and wipe them out?
That was the old theory, the waves of conquest theory.
Yeah.
Very dramatic, very Game of Thrones. But modern archaeology suggests something much more nuanced. It was likely an evolution and an absorption. The redware people didn't disappear. They became the ancestors.
They became the foundation.
Exactly, they were the rootstock. As new migrants arrived, maybe with better farming technology, the cultures blended. The redware people are still there, deep in the DNA of the Taino, and by extension, in the DNA of Jamaica.
It's like a ghost story in the archaeology. They are physically present in the soil, but we don't know their individual names. We don't have their songs.
We don't.
But we know they were the pioneers who first looked at those blue mountains and said, "This is home."
And that transition is crucial, because by the time we get to roughly 1200 AD, we see the rise of what we identify as full Taino culture. And this isn't just a change in pottery styles, it's an explosion of social complexity, religion, and population density. This is when Xaymaca truly becomes a powerhouse in the Caribbean.
So let's talk about that name, Xaymaca. We've all heard land of wood and water. It's on the tourist brochures. It's on the currency. But the sources suggest it means something much deeper than just a description of the scenery. It isn't just a weather report.
It definitely isn't. In the Taino worldview, language describes the essence of a thing, not just its appearance. Xaymaca creates a spiritual geography. When they called it the land of wood and water, they were describing the lifeblood of their civilization.
The lifeblood.
The rivers were arteries. They were the highways for trade and communication, yes, but they were also sacred entities. Fresh water on an island is life itself.
And the forests. Because wood sounds like lumber to us modern folks. It sounds like a raw material waiting to be cut down.
That's the colonial mindset creeping in, see? For the Taino, the forest was the temple and the pharmacy.
Temple and pharmacy, I like that.
It was where the spirits resided, but it was also where you went to survive and heal. The sources describe the island as a sacred body. It's a living entity.
A living being.
Yeah. And you don't exploit a living entity, you enter into a relationship of reciprocity with it. You take care of the land, and the land takes care of you.
Can you give me an example of the pharmacy aspect? What did they know?
Well, take the guayacan tree, what we call lignum vitae. It's one of the hardest woods in the world.
Right.
The Taino used it for structural posts, sure, but they also used the resin and bark to treat a variety of ailments, including syphilis. They knew that wild basil calmed the stomach. They knew which vines contained compounds that would stun fish without poisoning the meat.
That is incredible.
This wasn't mystical magic. This was rigorous scientific observation developed over centuries of trial and error.
That concept of the island as a body is really sticking with me. It changes how you see the landscape. The rivers aren't just water sources, they're veins. The mountains aren't just barriers, they're bones.
Yes.
So let's zoom in. Let's time travel down from the satellite view and walk into a village. We are in Xaymaca, maybe the year 1300 AD. What are we seeing? What does it smell like? What does it look like?
Okay. You would likely be walking into a large, organized clearing, often near a river or the coast. The first thing that would strike you is the order. These weren't random clusters of huts.
No.
They were centered around a plaza, a central space. The homes, called bohíos, were marvels of engineering. They were circular, constructed with wood and palm thatch, but designed specifically to withstand
Hurricanes.
exactly hurricanes.
The aerodynamics, right.
Huh.
A roundhouse lets the wind pass around it rather than smashing into a flat wall. We still struggle with hurricane proofing today, and they had it figured out with natural materials.
They did, and inside, life was communal. But the real engine of this civilization, the thing that allowed them to build this society, was the Conuco.
The Conuco, that's the farming system, right?
Yes. And this is where we need to dispel the myth of primitive people just picking fruit off trees in a tropical paradise. That's not what this was.
Yeah.
Conuco agriculture was highly sophisticated geoengineering. They would construct large mounds of earth, knee-high and several feet wide, often carved into hillsides.
Why mounds? Why not just flat fields like we think of in Europe?
Two big reasons. First, erosion control. In the heavy tropical rains, flat soil just washes away. The mounds stabilize the earth.
Okay, that makes sense.
And second, tuber management. The mounds kept the soil loose and aerated, which is perfect for root vegetables like cassava or yucca and sweet potatoes. It kept the roots from rotting in standing water. It was essentially high-yield permaculture.
So they were actively modifying the landscape to maximize food production.
They had to. We are talking about supporting a large population, estimates vary, but tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people.
Wow.
And cassava was the staple. And cassava is tricky. There is bitter cassava, which is toxic if you eat it raw. It contains cyanide.
Right, I've heard about this.
So they developed this complex technology to grate it, squeeze out the poisonous juice using a woven tube called a civilisation, and then bake the remaining pulp into these flatbreads called casabe.
And that bread lasts.
Right. For months. Without spoiling.
That is food security.
Yeah.
That is the basis of civilization. If you aren't worrying about where your next meal is coming from, you have time for art, for politics, for religion.
Precisely. And the sea, obviously, played a huge role. Xaymaca wasn't isolated. It was part of a bustling Caribbean network. We have evidence of trade with Cuba, with Hispaniola, which they called Haiti.
And they were master fishermen.
Master fishermen, using nets, spears, and even remora fish attached to lines to catch turtles.
Wait, hold on. I need to stop you there. I've read about this in the notes, and it blows my mind every time. They used fish to catch turtles. How does that even work?
It's a brilliant biohack. The remora is a sucker fish that naturally attaches itself to larger marine animals like sharks or turtles to hitch a ride.
Okay.
The Taino would catch a remora, tie a line to its tail, and keep it alive in a pen. When they spotted a sea turtle, they would release the remora. The fish would instinctively swim out and lash onto the turtle's shell with incredible suction force.
No way.
Yes. And then the fisherman just carefully pulls the line back, hauling in the remora and the turtle.
That is incredible. It's that aha moment of realizing how deeply observant they were of the natural world. They didn't just build a better hook. They used the biology of the ocean itself.
They co-opted it.
Okay, so we have the economy, farming, and fishing. But what about the people? I think it's easy to get lost in the anthropology of it all, the pottery shards and the farming mounds, and forget these were human beings.
That is the core of this deep dive. We have to humanize the past. These villages were filled with the sounds of life. There was laughter, there was interpersonal drama, there were gender roles.
Tell me about that.
Well, the sources paint a picture of a sharing economy. Food was generally shared communally. If a hunter brought back a hutia, which is a large rodent, it wasn't just for his family, it was distributed.
And the gender roles? Was it strictly men hunt, women cook?
It was divided but complementary. Men typically handled the heavy clearing of fields, hunting, and fishing. Women managed the planting, the harvesting, and the very complex processing of the cassava. But here's where it gets really interesting. Women held significant power. The society was matrilineal.
Meaning inheritance went through the mother.
Yes. If you were a cacique, a chief, your title didn't go to your son. It went to your sister's son.
Your nephew.
Your nephew. Because in a world before DNA tests, you always know who the mother is. This ensured the bloodline was pure. It gave women a central structural role in the political continuity of the tribe.
I want to dig deeper into that political structure because this wasn't an egalitarian free-for-all. There was a hierarchy, there was government. This wasn't just people hanging out on the beach.
Not at all. There was a very clear, rigid political structure. Xaymaca was divided into chiefdoms or caciques. At the top was the cacique.
The chief.
Yes, but chief sometimes feels too small a word or too loaded with Western movie tropes. The cacique was a political and a spiritual leader.
Both.
They held the power of life and death, but they were also bound by immense obligation to the people. A cacique couldn't just hoard wealth. Their status came from their generosity, how much they could give away at feasts.
So power was tied to giving, not taking.
Exactly. Below them were the Tainos, who were the nobles, the warrior class, the administrators. They managed the food stores and the defense.
And the spiritual leaders?
The bohiques, the shamans or priests. Extremely powerful figures because they controlled the connection to the spirit world and to healing. And finally, you have the naborias, the commoners, or the working class who did the farming and fishing.
So the pyramid.
It is, but it was held together by ritual. It wasn't just, I have the spear, so you do what I say. It was, I have the connection to the ancestors, so I guide us.
And how did that play out in public?
The most visible manifestation of this politics meets ritual dynamic was the body.
The ball court. I've seen pictures of these ancient courts in Puerto Rico and bits of them in Jamaica. They look like plazas lined with stones.
The body is fascinating because it defies our modern categories. Was it a sport? Yes. They played a game with a solid rubber ball.
Which was new to Europeans.
Completely new. They had never seen rubber before this. They were baffled by how the ball bounced. They thought it was alive.
Wow.
You had to keep the ball in the air using your hips, your elbows, and your knees. No hands, no feet.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
It requires immense athleticism. But it wasn't just for entertainment. The baity was where conflicts were resolved. It was where judicial decisions were made. It was where the community gathered to honor the gods.
So instead of going to war with a neighboring village over a boundary line, you might settle it on the ball court.
Often, yes. It was a way to channel aggression and settle disputes without the destruction of warfare. It was central to the civic life of the village.
And women were involved.
Women played too, by the way. There were games for men and games for women. The baity was the heartbeat of the village's public life. It was their courthouse, their stadium, and their church, all in one.
This brings us to the spiritual side of things. You mentioned the bohiques and the caciques having a spiritual role. The sources talk a lot about Zemis. Now, I feel like I've heard this word used to describe idols in old textbooks, but the expert notes here are very firm. Zemis are not idols.
That is a crucial distinction. In the Western Judeo-Christian framework that the colonizers brought, an idol is often seen as a false god or just a statue that people mistakenly worship.
Right.
For the Taino, a zemi was a vessel. It could be a carving of wood, stone, bone, or even a bundle of cotton containing ancestor remains. But it wasn't the object itself that was worshipped. The object was a house for a spiritual presence.
Like a conduit or an anchor.
Exactly. A conduit's a great word. Zemis were considered living beings. They had names, they had personalities. Some Zemis were associated with rain, some with fertility, some with specific ancestors. They had to be fed with snuff or cassava. They had to be cared for.
So having one gave you power.
If a cacique had a powerful Zemi, it gave him political legitimacy. It meant he had the favor of the spirits. It wasn't just art, it was technology for communicating with the divine.
And how did they communicate with these spirits? The sources mentioned the Cahoba ritual. And this sounds intense.
This is perhaps the most intense and sacred aspect of Taino life. Cuhobo was a potent hallucinogenic powder made from the seeds of the Anadomderliana peregrina tree, often mixed with tobacco or crushed shells to activate it.
And what did they do with it?
In a solemn ceremony, usually to make a major decision, the cacique or bohique would inhale this powder.
How?
They used a specialized bifurcated tube, a Y-shaped snuff pipe made of wood or bone. They would place the ends in both nostrils and inhale deeply.
And this wasn't recreational. This wasn't a party drug.
No, not at all. This was a grueling, physically intense experience. It often caused violent purging. The purpose was to leave the physical body and travel to the spirit world.
To get answers.
In that state, the cacique would consult with the Zemis and the ancestors. Should we go to war? Is a hurricane coming? Why is the harvest failing? When the cacique returned from that trance, his words were the law because they came from the other side.
It really emphasizes how porous the border was between the living and the dead for them. The ancestors weren't gone.
Not at all.
They were in the room.
That's the key to understanding Xaymaca as the land of ancestors. The dead were active participants in the community. They were often buried under the earthen floors of the bohíos or in caves nearby. You lived with your lineage. You slept above them.
Wow.
This gave the people a profound sense of identity and belonging. You knew exactly who you were because you were literally standing on the bones of the people who made you.
That leads perfectly into the idea of raising a nation.
Yeah.
How did they pass this knowledge on? They didn't have books. They didn't have Wikipedia. If you wanted your child to know the history of the Red Ware people or the proper way to respect a Zemi, how did you teach them?
Oral tradition. And we shouldn't think of oral tradition as, unreliable telephone games. In oral societies, the preservation of memory is a high art.
It's a technology in itself.
It is. Stories were told around the fire, yes, but they were structured. There were chants, songs, and dances called aretos that encoded the history of the people.
Aritos, that sounds like a performance.
It was a collective performance. An areto could last for hours, sometimes days. It was where the history of the clan, the deeds of the ancestors, the genealogy of the Caciques, and the laws of the gods were sung and danced by the entire community.
So this is how a child learned their place in the world.
It's multisensory learning. You don't just read about your history, you dance it, you sing it. The rhythm helps you remember.
And what about childhood itself? The sources mention naming ceremonies.
A child wasn't just born and that was it. There were rituals to welcome them. Names were fluid. You might gain a new name as you achieved things in life.
Oh, interesting.
If you showed bravery or skill in fishing, your name might change to reflect that. But the upbringing was communal. Children learned through imitation and play. They made miniature pottery. They practiced with small bows.
So it takes a village, Wes.
It was literal reality in Xaymaca. You were raised by the community.
I love the note about humor in the sources. Jokes, interpersonal drama. It reminds us that despite the profound spirituality and the hard work of the Conuco, these were people who laughed.
Humor is a survival mechanism. It's the glue of society. You can just imagine the banter while mending fishing nets, the teasing during the ball games.
Yeah.
It was a vibrant, loud, colorful society. They painted their bodies with ruku, which is a red dye, and jagua, a black dye. They wore jewelry of shell and gold alloy. It wasn't a stoic, silent existence.
So we have built this picture, a thriving civilization. Let's place ourselves in time. It is 1490, 1491, 1492. The sun rises, the sun sets. The Caciques inhale the cohoba. The fishermen catch the turtles using the remora. The children play in the beidi. It feels stable, eternal almost.
It feels like it will last forever.
And that is where the tragedy lies. Because we, the modern listeners, we know what is coming.
We do.
But they didn't. Or perhaps they did. This is the section of the source material that gave me chills. Rumors on the wind.
The Caribbean was interconnected. We know that news traveled fast via those massive canoe networks. We know they traded with the Bahamas, which they called the Lucayos, and Hispaniola.
Right.
By late 1492 and 1493, strange things were happening in those other islands. The sources suggest that before the ships actually appeared on the horizon of Xaymaca, the stories of them arrived first.
Can you just imagine that? You're sitting on the beach in Xaymaca, maybe near St. Anne's Bay, and a canoe pulls up from the east. The traders look terrified.
Yeah.
And they tell you about men in floating houses.
Floating houses with clouds for wings, the sails, men with hair on their faces because the Taino generally didn't grow beards, who possess sticks that make thunder and kill from a distance.
It would sound like mythology.
Like monsters from the spirit world. But the stories were consistent. They kept coming.
And the invisible enemy.
Disease. It travels faster than people. There is evidence that waves of sickness, smallpox, influenza, might have leaped ahead of the physical colonization through these trade networks.
So even before they saw a single ship.
The stability of Xaymaca might have already been trembling, a sense of dread. The cohoba visions becoming darker, the Zemis falling silent or giving the confusing answers.
It's the Red Ware silence all over again. But this time, it's not a slow fade. It's an approaching cliff.
Precisely. The horizon, which had always been a source of sustenance and guests, was turning into a source of danger. The world was about to collide with something incomprehensible.
And we are going to pause the story right there, right at that moment of tension. The boot hasn't hit the sand yet. Columbus hasn't stepped off his ship to claim what was never his. We are leaving the people of Xaymaca standing on the shore, looking out at a horizon that is about to change forever.
It's important to sit in this moment, to recognize that for centuries, Xaymaca was a complete world. It had its own heroes, its own villains, its own prayers, its own heartbreak. It didn't need Europe to validate its existence.
And that is the mission of the ABENG signal, to reclaim that time, to refuse the erasure. Because, as the sources remind us, the blood of these people, their words, barbecue, hammock, canoe, hurricane, Jamaica itself.
All Taino words.
Their place names, they still run through the island today.
Yeah.
You can't erase a mountain, You can't erase the spirit of the land.
The signal is still there if you know how to listen. The conch shell is still blowing.
This has been a heavy but a beautiful start to our journey. So as we wrap up this journey into Xaymaca, what is the legacy? We started by saying this whole series was a resistance mission against historical erasure.
The legacy is that Xaymaca never truly disappeared. The colonial history tried to overwrite it. They built Spanish Town, they built Kingston right on top of Taino sites. But look at the map. The names are still there. Look the food that people eat.
The cassava.
Bami, which is cassava bread, is still eaten every day in Jamaica. It's the same bread the redware people were baking 1,000 years ago.
And the language. There are echoes in the language.
More than echoes. Words like hurricane, barbecue, canoe, hammock, tobacco, maize, potato. These are all Taino words. They are words from Xaymaca and the wider Caribbean that conquered the entire world.
So every time we say barbecue or talk about a hurricane, we are speaking a little bit of Xaymaca.
We are. And most importantly, it's in the genetics. Modern DNA studies are proving conclusively that the extinction of the Taino was a myth. It was a paper extinction. The bloodlines survived. The people survived. The culture transformed, it blended, it went into hiding, but it survived.
That is the schoolbook correction the source talks about. This isn't a dead civilization you read about in a museum. It's a root system.
It's a root system, exactly. The redware silence isn't empty. It's full of echoes if you just learn how to listen for them.
Well, this has been an incredible journey. From the first piece of pottery in 600 AD to that anxious gaze at the horizon in 1494. It completely changes how I look at the map of the Caribbean.
It's a heavy history, but it's a powerful and a beautiful one too. It's a story of incredible resilience.
And this is just the beginning. The ABENG signal has been blown. The resistance mission has started.
Next time, the horizon breaks, the floating houses arrive, and the struggle for the very soul of the island begins.
We have established Xaymaca as a living nation. We've walked through the bohíos, stood in the Beatty, and listened to the ancestors. But the storm is coming.
Indeed. The collision is inevitable, and it won't be pretty.
In the next episode, we're going to face that collision head on. We are going to look at what happens when those strange sails finally break the horizon of Xaymaca in 1494. It's going to be intense, it's going to be heartbreaking, but it's a story that demands to be told.
I'll be ready.
To everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this time travel expedition. This is History Reclaimed. If you want to keep this signal strong, make sure you subscribe to the ABENG Signal channel. We have so much more to uncover.
Absolutely. There is always more to learn.
Bye-bye. See you in the next episode.